Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Top 10 edition of Magic Mike's, proudly sponsored by our Patreon supporters and CoolStuffInc.com, where you can find cool stuff in stock every day, and our co-sponsor CardHoarder.com, offering the best inventory prices and delivery of cards for Magic Online. I'm Evan Irwin, and we get started each Top 10 by saying hello to my two co-hosts, Aaron Campbell.
Hello.
Switched on me. Ruben Bressler.
Hi.
Normally, I'm pointing this, and it goes that way. It's a long story.
Well,
the point is, it's time.
You're banned.
This is a weird list, and I don't know if this has ever happened, but no one has any hires. No one has any sames.
I think it's happened once.
Has it happened once?
I don't remember, but I think.
So the reasoning for that might be we added a clause to this show in that it can be any card that was on the list at one point. They don't have to be on it right now. So you might take a look at the list, and there actually aren't that many cards that are on it currently between the formats. But there's a post that I found on a site called mtg.gamepedia that has a timeline of every single banning and restriction that's happened with like an explanation in the format. And when you go back to the beginning, there were so many cards, and a lot of mine are cards that have since been removed, and it's quite silly that they were even on there to begin with. But when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, so many cards have been on the list.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I actually have some on here because of that. The ability for it to kind of leave and show up and go away and stuff. And you know, speaking of cards from long ago, well, we'll get there for my number 10, but we also need to continue here onward because we also begin with our choice of the top comment from last week in a segment we call Honorable Mention, where Ruben will tell us who was the most luxuriant and letting us know what card we did not choose as one of our top 10 M19 cards. Ruben?
I just fell in love with Tony Giordano's comment. And so if you're prepared for this dramatic reading,
oh boy,
here is what Tony wrote for us in his most luxuriant voice. There's one egregious oversight on this list, if only for its simultaneous flavor win and fail. It's a win for the name alone and a fail because it's a bear commander that does nothing for bears. That aside, Goreclaw, Terror of Call, that's pronounced Call, Evan, K-A-H-L, and he spells out the thing for you.
Thanks.
Sisma is my sleeper pick for the set. The toughness is problematic as it's abradable, but if you untap with it, oh man, the shenanigans! 3 exclamation points. It pumps your big idiots, reduces their costs, and could push Mono G Stompy, Mono Green, where it clearly has a home, to the next level. And I mean, sex is great and all, but have you ever cast Ronus for 1 green mana, and then attacked with it as a 6/6 Death Touch Trample Indestructible? Galta gets cheaper. Verdurus costs 1 GG. That's Verdurus Gearhulk. Steel Leaf Champion costs... Okay, it's not perfect, but cost reduction is a scary ability nonetheless. This card puts the G in GGs, and so it definitely deserves an honorable mention slot.
That was lovely.
Putting the G in GGs. That was...
really good.
You got me on that one.
That's worth the price of admission.
That's a nice turn of phrase you got right there. Good old Tony.
Speaking of bears, I don't know if you saw, Evan, there was a young man in the YouTube comments who identifies as a bear, and he co-signed on your Karn art being delightful, and he was like, I endorse this bearness. So the bears, they're coming in support of you.
Pro Bears.
Even though that particular iteration of Evan Irwin is hairless.
But still just a big,
the real
squishy
one.
band, you know?
Yeah.
Giant.
New definition of Chrome Dome there.
Wow. Well, Tony G, you killed it. Give us a shout on a social media of your choice. And then later talk to Aaron, who will then say, hey, Evan, somebody on your social media of their choice.
Well, I have the spreadsheet now.
She does have the spreadsheet.
I do have the spreadsheet now.
Yes.
I'm in command of all the gift certificates. So it better be nice.
So contact Aaron nicely. Your gift certificate. $50 gifts, give it to CoolStuffInc.com. Thanks much for the sponsor for providing those. But it's time to talk about the top 10 banned and restricted cards. Now, this was weird for me. I felt like I certainly didn't want to do just like straight power level. I didn't want to list a bunch of Moxes and Time Twister and Black Lotus and whatever. I wanted to talk a little bit the way I viewed my lens, and I think this is one of those shows that's nice for us to kind of explain where we're coming from. My lens was like sort of, how did it sort of shape Magic? How did it impact formats? Like how important was it? You know, how impactful was it? That's sort of my vein. Ruben, how did you kind of view this one?
I sort of went with which cards feel like they entered their banned and or restricted phases in unique and interesting ways. Like, if we're talking about cards on the top 10 banned and restricted cards list, some cards, like a lot of cards are banned because they're just simply too powerful and then they stay there forever. I wanted cards to be like, this card was too powerful in context, or was, had a weird discussion or controversy around it, or had a lot of interesting things that happened to it along the way. So, sort of interesting cards that I found in my searching, like unique things in the collection of banned and restricted cards. That's how I put my list together.
I see. And Aaron, what were you thinking when you put your list together?
I had fun with this one. Like, my list ended up being, so the majority of my picks ended up being the why was this ever banned kind of list.
Right.
Just, Orcish Oriflame I had on my list at one point. What? Gauntlet of Might, just ridiculous cards like that were promptly pulled off the list and never put back on the list. So my bottom five bottom five are no longer on the list in any capacity. So those are the ones that are very silly. Why were these here? The top five are all very powerful cards that are still on the list to this day, banned in different formats. I have a nice little mix there. Some of them have made statements as to, relating to a particular mechanic or in a particular ability or something like that. And then some are just pet cards that I love just because they're so broken and they make me giggle. So I just have a nice mix of both there.
All right. So we'll get started with my number 10. And this one was kind of like, this is my silly pick. This is one of those that I like to sort of say, can you believe that X was once banned or restricted or whatever? And there's a couple of good options here that I only got to choose one, of course. But when you mentioned, like, you're going to go way back, you're going to look at the timeline, you're going to see what the first thing they ever banned or restricted was. Little card from Arabian Nights called Ali from Cairo.
Yeah.
Let's talk about an effect that is so powerful it scared wizards into making it on their first banned and or restricted list. Ali from Cairo is 2 red, 2 generic mana for a 0/1 human. Damage that would reduce your life total to less than 1 reduces it to 1 instead. That's the line of text that was too powerful in the world, of crazy effects. All I got there. It was,
and now you have worship.
yeah, it was removed shortly thereafter. It didn't last a long time. It wasn't like this was an actual tournament staple. It was, honestly, I think it was just, I guess, fear. Like, maybe they pushed it too far. And creatures really were too good, which they weren't until like 10 years ago. But whatever. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, and then they even sort of made a time spiral homage to Ali from Cairo with Fortune Thief.
Yeah.
That wasn't even really that big of a player in Standard. I mean, I remember playing it in the sideboard of that mono red deck that was in block at the time, but that's not exactly ban worthy. And so, yeah, times have changed since Ali from Cairo was worthy of a banned list.
Aren't you glad they reprinted Fortune Thief and Masters 25? Ooh,
oh boy,
really bringing the cash on that one.
They did that.
Wow. All right, Ruben, what's your number 10?
I think that my list was tough to put together. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with my list, but I knew that there would be one card. I knew for a fact one card would appear on my list. Because I want Justice for Earthcraft.
Oh my God.
And so we're going to kick off things by talking about Earthcraft.
I'm surprised this isn't higher.
It's true.
Yeah. So, I wanted to start things off with a bang here,
Sure.
Colorless and a green enchantment from Tempest. Tap an untapped creature you control, untap target basic land. Currently banned in Legacy. It was banned in Standard in 1999. I believe it was banned in Old Extended, and it was restricted in Vintage at one point. So it's checked all the boxes. It's a hell of a powerful card. Its main combo today would be with a card called Squirrel Nest, which is a uncommon from Odyssey that is a colorless green enchantment aura that says enchanted land has tap, make a 1/1 squirrel. And so with Earthcraft, you can make a squirrel, tap the squirrel to untap the basic land, and basically make infinite tapped 1/1s on your turn for 5 mana.
And then you have to pass the turn, and then wait the turn.
You have to pass the turn, and then your opponent can potentially have Abrupt Decay in their deck. At this point, I mean, once we're passing the turn, we can have things like Engineered Plague or even Aaron's Doomwake Giant to clear the board. Like, I don't think this is that big of a problem if that's the deck. I think that Enchantress would have a lot of fun with it, considering all the wild growth shenanigans that you could do and tap your
Actually, when I was preparing for the last season of VSL, I was trying to do Vintage Enchantress, and I had put this in there, and I had never experienced the joy before, and after using it, I was like, now I know why Ruben loves this card.
Also,
look, I don't think it's overpowered. I think that it is a reminder of a simpler time in which Abrupt Decay didn't exist, and we didn't have, great answers to green enchantments. But I definitely think that this one, I've said for years at this point, half a decade at this point, that I think that Earthcraft can come off, and I still think it can.
I mean, first of all, it's on the reserve list, $58 right now, literally unplayable at $58 per copy. So if it becomes unbanned, then you're going to need to place that. That number is going to get a lot higher because it's going to be hard to get a hold of.
That's the best argument for
the unbanned Jace. I mean, the Jace is reprintable, so that makes sense.
Absolutely. I don't know. I could see it. Basically, it feels like the World Gorger Dragon unbanning. You're just like, oh, they did it. And nothing happened. You're like, okay, that's cool. Thanks. I mean, just move on. Aaron, what's your number 10?
My number 10 was initially banned on January 25th, 1994, as part of the initial push of cards along with Ali from Cairo. But I think most players got their first taste of this card in Dominaria, actually, as an uncommon. I know I wasn't around for a lot of it's been reprinted several times, and I wasn't around for the earlier versions, and so I didn't necessarily appreciate what this card could do. But this card is a powerhouse. It does so many things, and it's just one of those where when I look back on it, I'm like, this was banned? Like, what? My number 10 is Icy Manipulator. So Icy Manipulator is 4 colorless. It's an artifact. You can pay 1 colorless and tap it to tap either target artifact, target creature, or a land. And it's simple enough, but this card can do everything. It can play offense, where if you want to get through a blocker, you can tap that blocker. If you're trying to be defensive, you can tap their attacker before they get through. If your opponent is playing a greedy deck, and let's say they have only one way to generate a certain color of mana, you can tap that mana down. This card is so good, and when Dominaria was out and all of the guides came out as like draft picks and seal, this card was getting such high ratings, and there was a whole new audience for this card that wasn't able to appreciate it in the past. I was like, really? Like, it's a 4-mana artifact? And then but when you really got a taste of it, you were like, okay, I get it now. And then there was the Voltaic Servant where you could just whoop, whoop, and but to think that this was one of the initial ones that was too good for the game, and now look at it.
Wow. I mean, when I first started playing in 1996, seeing the Bone Crank version, I didn't even see.
Yes.
I didn't even know it. Yeah, I didn't even know it was in freaking alpha or whatever. I didn't even see the one with the hand in the globe for years later. Because for me, that was the thing, and that was one of the coolest pieces of artwork. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was fan-freaking-tastic. It was very powerful when you first start in the game. You're just like, man, I can shut down anything. Tapping their land on their upkeep was a thing. And it's amazing that they brought it back to Dominaria. Still a first-pick draftable card. Still absolutely terrific. They built in little combos with it. Like this one just has the place in the heart, man. It's just
absolutely,
right
yeah. There were 2 copies of Icy Manipulator in the very first Pro Tour winning deck. Pro Tour New York, 1996, Michael Lecanto's blue-white control deck that also featured the obviously too powerful and had to be banned Zurin Orb, Veldon's Cane. I think Ivory Tower was banned.
Ivory Tower was banned.
There is also a balance in this deck. There's 1 Strip Mine. I think that you were allowed to play 4 of that at the time. Land Tax was banned at some point. Just a pile of banned cards in this kind of awful garbage. I mean, there are 2 Blinking Spirits in this deck, Evan, as the main win conditions. So obviously that's near and dear to your heart. But boy, howdy. But yeah, Icy Manipulator, powerful back then, powerful now in a different context. Maybe the best card to first pick in Dominaria Limited, which of course we've talked about is maybe the best limited format that we've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I love it.
Oh my gosh. So, moving on here to number 9. And for number 9, I don't know. I was trying to find cards, again, that were just sort of the pillars, the things that were just crucial to that when they got the ban. You were just like, wow, this was incredible. This card, it's hard going back and reading this card and not going like, how on earth were they okay with this card? I don't get it. It's on the reserve list. Currently about, it's like $25, but it should be more for as busted as it is. It's a card from Stronghold, and it's called Dream Halls.
Yes.
And 2 blue, 3 generic mana. It is a rare enchantment that says, rather than pay the mana cost for a spell, its controller may discard a card that shares a copy with that spell. That's so busted. I just can't. And there was the Dream Halls and the what was it, Windfall combo. That was the right one. And it's just, this card is so, it's just busted. Anything you want to do, can you imagine? These days, you get to have these insane spells. Just like, I'm just discard my Llanowar Elves and just play this freaking monster. Play a Galta, go. I mean, anything you want. This card is so busted. It's insane.
This is a card that people recommended when Muldrotha came out, because you could, discard a card to pay for a card, and then that card feeds your graveyard, which Muldrotha can then recast. And so, I was around for those sets. Those were some of my favorite sets. And I think back to like teenage me playing Magic in my friend's basement, and I could have never dreamed, how powerful that card was, in the grand scheme of things. And I love that card so much.
Yeah, I mean, with stuff like, again, back in the day, we had Mind Over Matter and stuff, and there was Earthcraft in there, where it got banned and extended alongside Yawgmoth's Will, because that card was also fair. I mean, this is just one of those cards, like, amongst an insanely unfair environment, you just go back and you go, like, what were they thinking? What were they actually thinking with this kind of card? It's nuts.
Yeah, Dream Halls went relatively unnoticed for a long time until Zvi Mauschwitz, the madman, came along with a deck called Turbo Zvi. And for those of you that want some weird history on a deck, Turbo Zvi was basically resolve Dream Halls, cast Mana Severance on yourself, and then meditate yourself a bunch and sift yourself a bunch until you draw your whole deck. And then you have 1 copy of Lobotomy and some Gaia's Blessings, and you basically lobotomy your opponent's deck until they have nothing left in their deck. That's how the deck works.
Jesus.
And that's all the deck did. And you could also, and then once you empty their deck, you could inspiration them a couple of times, by which I mean an infinite number of times. By which I mean an arbitrarily large amount of times, to make them draw their entire deck. And it was absurd. It's when you look at a list for Turbo Zvi, you have no idea what's going on.
I mean, even the way you're describing it, it's like, who would think to put all of these pieces together? Like, you'd have to, it's like a beautiful mind. Like, what?
That's why Zvi's in the Hall of Fame now. Is basically, we've talked about the solution in the past. We've talked about, like, the green-white Llanowar Elf kind of decks. We've talked about fires in context with Zvi, but really this was the deck that put him on the map of, like, this is no one else's brain works like this. And that just sort of exemplifies the weirdness and the glass cannon power of Dream Halls.
Yeah, sure. It's absolutely amazing. Just again, Google Turbo Zvi, and it's just, this is sort of how Magic used to be. How Magic used to be was like, there is a correct way of this puzzle fitting and operating. Yep. If you can find the best way for it to operate, because that's what it was, everything was spell-based. All the creatures were garbage. So when you found the right way to put the spells together, you're like, okay, I'm going to do this weird loop thing while I draw stuff, and then I pay for it by doing nothing. And, it's insane. So,
oh, man.
Yeah, this Dream Halls leads to these crazy types.
And now we have Pro Tours where you get the best minds in a room, and all they can come up with is play mono red. I mean...
Ruben?
Hi, what? Yeah.
something mono red, something on brand.
That's my answer to every format, whether it's good or not. So I'm not the right one to talk to about that.
What's your number 9, Ruben?
My number 9, there were a lot of cards that I could have put in this spot as sort of an homage to an archetype. But I wanted to talk specifically about Disciple of the Vault, because we've talked about the artifact lands before, we've talked about Aether Vial before, we've talked about Ravager before. We've never really focused on Disciple of the Vault, which weirdly is legal in Modern. For some reason, I had just assumed it was banned in Modern.
I did too.
But it's actually legal. And the reason is because the artifact lands are banned in Modern, so you can't do the combo finish that you can with Heartbound Ravager. But let's put a little bit of context here. Disciple of the Vault is a 1/1 for 1 black mana. It's a common human creature from Mirrodin. And it has the text, whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from play, You may have target opponent lose 1 life. This set up a lot of interesting combo finishes with Arcbound Ravager, which basically made the Ravager grow by 1 and your opponent's life total go down by 1. So every artifact you had in play would cost them 2 life, typically, making it sort of like an ATOG sort of variant. Also could live alongside ATOG. And I was also seen play in Pauper in those sort of affinity decks as well. It was banned in 3 separate formats. It was obviously banned in Standard and Extended, and then was banned in Mirrored and Block Constructed, obviously, as well. And so I just think that's an interesting card that lived in a unique time that, again, the banned list has sort of moved past, and we don't even talk about it in terms of its current power level.
Well, remember, if you have 2 of them out, they both trigger simultaneous. So you could literally just like 3 Disciple of the Vault, a Ravager, some lands, hit you for whatever, and then drain you for like 9 out of nothing. Just crazy.
I remember facing one of my first forays into Pauper. I was facing the ATOG deck and just sort of the Prophetic Prism, whoop, goes in the artifact, or when you sacrifice for the card, or even just the spheres, or it's like Chromatic Sphere, whoop, and it's like, oh my god, it just gets out of hand so fast.
Yeah, it is completely absurd how it's just demoralizing. Like, I was there when I got to come back to Magic, and I got to literally see what Affinity did to Magic, and it just the wrecking ball. Yeah. And this is the type of card where you're like, you don't have the second one, do you? And then they have the second one, and you die.
I also describe it as one of those cards. I know we like to describe a lot of cards this way, but it's one of those cards that you don't realize you're dead. So like you're looking at the board and you think you've got the combat math figured out, and then you realize, and then you haven't taken into account the way that card works, and you're like, oh, I'm just dead.
And it's free. Its ability is free.
Its ability is free. It's just a 1/1 for 1 mana. And it took over Standard. It was the only thing you could play in Standard for a long time.
It's true. All right. So Aaron, what's your number 9?
My number 9 is one of many blue draw spells that has come on and off the banned and restricted list throughout the years. Fan favorite. They've certainly tried to make different versions of it, or maybe fixed versions of it throughout the years. Most recently, Steam Augury, and I think there was some weird one involving a Sphinx recently too. Fortune's Favor or Fortune something. There's lots of these cantrips that give you choices, but none seem to be as well received or as powerful as my number 9, which was originally banned in Legacy on December 2001 and was restricted in Vintage, has since been removed from both lists. My number 9 is Fact or Fiction. So Fact or Fiction is 3 and a blue. It's an instant. It says reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. Put 1 pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. This was the one. This was the one that started it all. Cards of this stripe. And anytime something like this comes out, they always say, well, it's no Fact or Fiction. And so, but yet I also don't see Fact or Fiction very much in other formats. So it definitely has been outclassed by, maybe cheaper spells or better spells like Gifts Ungiven. There's certainly discussion for that. But this was the original, and it was good enough to be banned in Legacy, good enough to be restricted in Vintage, which says something. And just, I just look at it and I'm like, really? And it's free now to run free, but at one time it was very scary.
I mean, FOF EOT IW was in fact a well-known and well-used acronym for Fact or Fiction. End of turn, I win, because you could just. This is one of those barometers. This sort of sounds like the types of things. If you want to know the types of things that pros talk about, like when they sit around and there's jibber-jabber about Magic, they'll do something like this. They'll say, Fact or Fiction, here's your 5 cards, here's your board state, whatever, what was the split, and you got to do the split, and then you argue about the split and who did the split right, who did the split wrong. Essentially, the better your opponent, the better they're going to be able to split those cards, and the worse your opponent, you're like, wow, I can't believe you gave me both combo pieces, thanks. And, Randy Buehler tried to kind of fix it with Gifts Ungiven, and it's still basically busted.
Still busted. Yeah.
So the idea of doing this, to give your opponent the ability to screw themselves in a way, is something that we don't see a lot of anymore. And they did it a little bit. Jace, Architect of Thought, I believe, had sort of the mini
had sort of a little bit of that flavor. Karn, Scion Reversa has a little bit of that flavor as well, with the piles. Definitely, Architect of Thought has that flavor.
Yeah,
right.
But yeah, Fact or Fiction, just an incredibly powerful card. Originally part of a big cycle. There was like a whole cycle of something or something uncommons and something or something rares from Invasion. There were cards like Fight or Flight, Do or Die. And Fact or Fiction was really the only one that saw any play. And for good reason, because it is just amazing.
Yeah, it is fan-freaking-tastic. All right, so let's move on here to number 8. Ruben, what is your number 8?
My number 8 is a card that really it didn't have its moment in the sun very long, but when it did, it certainly shone bright. Like, it just sort of exploded onto the scene, dominated for like the tournament that it could dominate, and then went away because it immediately got banned. You might say that it's a flash in the pan. My number 8 is Flash. Flash is a colorless into blue instant originally from the Mirage expansion, reprinted in 6th edition and, of course, Masters 25. You may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you do, sacrifice it, unless you pay its mana cost reduced by up to 2. This card was banned in Legacy in 2007, restricted in Vintage soon thereafter, and all thanks to a little card called Protean Hulk, which is a 7-mana 6/6 from Dissension that allowed you to go look through your deck for up to 6 converted mana cost worth of creatures. Speaking of Disciple of the Vault, the original combo with this in terms of testing was to go get your 4 Disciple of the Vaults and a bunch of X casting cost artifacts that were X mana XXs, so that when you search for them, they were 0/0s for 0. And you could, all of your Phyrexian Marauders and Shifting Walls, I think were the 2 cards, would basically dome your opponent.
Well, I would note
the updated combo after that later became having something to do with Body Double. After Revelark was printed and Body Double were printed, then they sort of became the combo. But Steve Sadin won Grand Prix Columbus in 2007 with Karmic Guide, Kiki Jiki, Mog Fanatic, Carrion Feeder, and Body Snatcher. Ugh. I think was like somewhere in there was the combo, and yeah, it was that was a hell of a card.
Well, it's also a very sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's also a very important piece of the Rector Flash deck in Vintage. The theory being that you flash an Academy Rector, and then you sacrifice it. You get something like Omniscience, or you can even just settle for your Emrakul and be like, whoop! Yep. My friend Keith likes to play that deck, and yeah, I've seen some pretty crazy plays come out of there.
I would say that it wasn't so much Protean Hulk. It was a rules update in May 2007.
Indeed.
Rolled back what Flash used to. Flash used to work in the way that I think they kind of sort of designed it to, which was essentially you want to give the card Flash, you're giving it a 2-mana discount because you're paying 2 mana for the spell. So you'd have to pay the mana for Flash and the spell in order for it to actually function. Well, the rules update says it's just going to do what the card says. You're going to put that thing out there and you're going to sack it if you want to, and they just broke everything. And it was legal for 1 month. May 2007 was the only time Hulk Flash was legal in Legacy, and it was broken. And that's how it won the tournament. Like, and that's one of those things that literally ever since that time, they are always super clear about every single card that got errated. This was errated essentially, not necessarily in secret, but you had to be paying attention. You know what I mean? You had to read it and understand what they were changing. And now it's like all these cards are changing. Here's how they're changing. Just so you know, there's a bunch of rules updates that they give every single set, so this never happens again.
Yep. I take back the Emrakul thing. I'm actually reading the card, and Emrakul doesn't do anything. It really is the Academy Rector thing, so I apologize for that.
And now Arena Rector lets you go and get a
Planeswalker.
Lost God Pharaoh or whatever.
Absolutely. Aaron, what's your number 8?
My number 8 was originally banned in September of 1999. It was banned in Legacy. Has since been taken off the ban list, but this card is particularly scary in the lands decks or in the Turbo Depths decks. Any kind of deck where you want to find a specific kind of land. You know, people love to hate Tron and Modern, and they love to complain about Sylvan Scrying and Expedition Map, but you haven't, things get a little scarier once you start getting into older formats, and you run into a little card called Crop Rotation. So Crop Rotation is 1 green. It's an instant. It says, as an additional cost to cast Crop Rotation, sacrifice a land. You can search your library for a land card and put that card onto the battlefield untapped, and then shuffle your library. So if you're playing against lands in Legacy, you don't know. Like, anytime you see a green mana open, you have no idea what's coming. They can Crop Rotation into a Tabernacle, They can crop rotation into Bojuka Bog, which they love to do against me, by the way. They can crop rotation into a Glacial Chasm. Or if they're after the Merit Lage combo, you get whatever half is missing from that. The Cloud Post decks, if you have a tapped Locust, go ahead and crack it, get you another Locust, and then Candelabra and have a really good time. It's just broken. And so, it's not hard to look back on the older ban lists and wonder how it got there. But it's not banned anymore. And if you've never faced a crop rotation, it's quite an experience when you do.
It's really interesting to look back that in 1999 September, that's when they banned crop rotation amongst others, like Lotus Petal, and all sorts of like Voltaic Key and stuff. Just really weird. And then literally 5 years later, in September, they're just like, let's just gotta put everything back. We're sorry, messed that up. They all got unbanned. Yeah. It's weird. It's like a whole shift.
That was the first instance of, do we want to have a big band list or a small band list? How heavily do we want to curate the band list? Right. There's no discounting how powerful crop rotation's effect is. It's a tutor effect that you can do at instant speed. Played in Legacy now, it's great protection against Wasteland, which is one of the big stopgaps of the format. Mm-hmm. Obviously, in the Dark Depths Thespian Stage decks, either the Turbo versions or the Lands decks, it's a very important combo piece to be able to hold everything together. And it's obviously from one of my favorite, if not my very favorite, expansions, Urza's Legacy, where everything was so broken, even the commons got banned.
Wow. I mean, first of all, that's totally true. Those sets were stupidly crazy broken. But it's weird and interesting to me that there was a dual decks Nissa versus Ob Nixilis version, because it's a common.
Art is gorgeous.
And it's absolutely amazing. And that's why it's $5. Yeah, you can get the Urza's Legacy one for $2. Yeah. It's rare you see the older version being the cheaper version.
That's true.
Yeah. So, all right. So with crop rotation in for your number 8, it is time to share mine. And this is one of those cards that I would consider very similar to Disciple of the Vault. You know what I mean? It's not the flashy thing that got all the attention. It's a card that probably would have been fine had they not, put things in place to make it broken. And we've spoken about this particular mechanic before. Energy is broken. Energy does not work as a magic mechanic. Look, I appreciate what Rosewater was trying to do, and I get where he was coming from, and I understand his the design philosophy. When you have to ban a card that all it does is search up a basic land, your mechanic is broken, and Attune with Ether is freaking ridiculous that it had to be added to a ban list. Attune with Ether is 1 green common sorcery from Kaladesh. All it does, search your library for a basic land, show it to your opponent, put it in your hand, shuffle your libraries, and get 2 energy counters. And that's busted. That is, turns out, you make a resource that can just grow and grow and grow for doing, for blinking your eyes or whatever, and for going and searching your basic land, so you make your 3-color deck as consistent as possible. You have to ban it. They had to ban Attune with Ether. It's so silly to me, yet it is necessary.
Yeah, the fact that the energy is a currency for so many different cards, where you're getting the basic land, so it's basically just a lay of the land card. But that 2 energy can feed a Whirler Virtuoso. That 2 energy can feed a Glimmer of Genius. That 2 energy can feed an Ether Hub, which helps you fix your mana. Servant of the Conduit is another one. It's the fact that energy. It'd be one thing if it gave you like a specific kind of mana where there was some limitation there. But I remember seeing an altar of some card where it just said all of the things you can do. And the fact that it's so versatile is really what made it so scary. And the fact that, like you mentioned, there really wasn't a good way to ever empty energy. So there wasn't a way to take it away from you. Right. You just got it and you got to keep it.
And these days, Wizards prints Weirds Hosers and M19.
3 sets later.
Thanks, guys. You really crushed it.
This one's one that was banned this year, which is interesting, and also left a banned list, the Brawl banned list. You're allowed to play your Attune with Ethers, which I think is funny. Ooh. This was also our most hated card last year, according to the Magic Mikesies. So well deserving of a reference here on the most on the top 10 banned and restricted list.
Yeah, it's messed up. It just makes me sad. It's just, again, like, how bad was it? They had to ban this card. And you're like, they had to ban this card? They had to ban that card. Ugh. All right. So, Ruben, what's your number 7?
Well, this is the total other end of the age spectrum. We have not I'm not sure I've ever talked about this card. I'm not sure we've ever talked about this card. But all of the manual dexterity cards got banned very, very early in Magic. And Chaos Orb gets most of the pub, but I'm a red mage. And so let's talk about Falling Star.
Yes.
God.
Falling Star, listen to this text box, ladies and gentlemen. 2 colorless and a red sorcery.
Oh my God.
Flip Falling Star onto the playing area from a height of at least 1 foot. Falling Star deals 3 damage to each creature it lands on. Tap all creatures dealt damage by Falling Star. If Falling Star doesn't completely turn over at least once during the flip, it has no effect. This was... You're welcome, America. This was from Legends, and so therefore is weird. It is banned in Legacy. It is banned in Vintage, and it's banned in Commander, of course.
I mean, how would you even, like, how would you measure the foot? Like, who's got tape measures on them, number one? And number two, how would you track, like, there's just so many things you got to keep an eye on where it's like, how?
I mean, GG metric users, like, what's
Right,
a foot?
exactly.
How tall's a foot again? Like, literally the rest of the world doesn't know what height you're supposed to drop this from. That's really sad. Again, this is card. Why is it $50? Because reserve list. It's
because hilarious.
Because of hilarious. It's just, it's really weird and funny and silly, and I appreciate not just going the Chaos Orb route. That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, Aaron, what's your number 7?
My number 7 is one of the cards that I think really got Wizards thinking that they could maybe start to let loose a little bit in Modern, that they could maybe start to unban some things that had been on the ban list for a while. And I think when a card gets unbanned and it doesn't make an impact, that's actually a good thing, because that means that they made the right decision and that the Brewers are free to sort of play with the card, and that the card can certainly see some play, but you know, that's not going to dominate the formats like they used to, or like people thought they would. I got to experience this card the other day. My friend Chris and I were playing Commander. My friend Chris was playing Ishkana as their commander. I was playing Sharoom. Chris was trying to drain me with spider triggers. I was gaining, draining, gaining. And then I cast a Soul Scour and swung in with my Thopters. My number 7 was banned in June of 2010, and it is Sword of the Meek. So Sword of the Meek is 2 colorless. It's an artifact equipment. It says equipped creature gets +1/+2, costs 2 to equip it, and then whenever a 1/1 creature comes into play under your control, you may return Sword of the Meek from your graveyard to play and then attach it to this creature. So it pairs very well with a card called Thopter Foundry. And so if you have a lot of mana, you just basically pour it into that, make a bunch of Thopters, gain a bunch of life. The sword is going to be equipped to at least one of them. And so my friend was making spiders, I was making Thopters with this nice little draw. And I eventually got there thanks to this card. And this was one of the first cards that they did take off the ban list. Like I said, it was on the list for a good 6 or 7 years at that point. And then they were like, let's go ahead and let's see what it can do. And it did nothing, which is a good thing. And so I'm very happy it was unbanned. You know, I did enjoy seeing people try to play with it. Some of the control decks had tried to do something with it. But the card has brought me a lot of joy as a Commander player, and I just appreciate what it can do.
Yeah, I mean, that they unbanned it in April 2016 alongside Ancestral Vision. And I know that Ancestral Vision was... Wizards has always viewed that as a very scary card. Always very scary. But this one in and of itself with Thopter Foundry just turns into just like a crazy token maker, and originally banned in Extended and Modern, and then Extended died because it sucked, and then Modern kept going, and then they're like, okay, let's try it out, and they're like, you're cool, we're cool. Sometimes they do it and they grave troll the whole format. They accidentally grave trolled the whole format, and then they take it back. Then they take it back. I'm sorry, I'd bring that up. All right.
Too soon.
Well,
we might be talking about that later. Speaking
of too soon, another ban from this year. I'm not sure if we're even 2 or 3 weeks out now. A card that originally bought me lunch. If you've listened to the podcast, you probably heard me say it a few times.
Aaron, you might want to go take a break.
There's nothing like a Death Rite Shaman to make you feel warm and toasty on a banned and restricted list, because this card was ridiculous. This card ran Legacy, not necessarily Brainstorm-esque style per se, but like close. It impacted everything that happened in that format. Like, it's just, I felt it was not necessarily quite to Force of Will level, but it was just like, it was such a huge monster, and how you played, what deck you played, how you dealt with certain problems. It was the 1 mana Planeswalker. Deathrite Shaman, for those who don't know, is a Golgari mana, so green or black. 1 mana for
Aaron
a 1/2.
Get behind Golgari mana.
Yeah, there we are. Tap, exile target land card from a graveyard, not any of them.
A graveyard, yeah.
Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Black, tap, exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard. Each opponent loses 2 life. And green, tap, exile target creature card from a graveyard. You gain 2 life. This thing does everything but make you pancakes in the morning. Mm-hmm. Says Austin leaves little notes in your lunch bag, so you can find them later. Like, Deathrite Shaman, just like, if you're trying to hate on the graveyards, as Aaron well knows, this thing is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
This card has brought me a lot of misery over the years. And, aside from the graveyard thing, it really just got to the point where it made mana cost obsolete. Check Pile was a popular deck in Legacy for a while. And when you look at what was in Check Pile, you had people that were running Kolaghan's Command and Daze and Shrew Name Nemesis and Leovold and Wasteland in the deck, because why not? Because of this card. This card made color obsolete. It made mana obsolete. It was a Bird of Paradise that could single-handedly win you the game. It was a card that I feel enabled lazy gameplay, where you could essentially keep a hand at 2 Deathrights, and just by playing the game, you could essentially win. And I think another sign, I talked a little bit earlier about how, when a card gets unbanned, with some of the signs that you can tell that was a good decision. I think likewise, when a card gets banned, when you see this glute of creativity come out, that's a sign that it was holding things back. And the Legacy League right now, on Magic Online, the competitive Legacy League has more players than the Standard League right now. It's inching as close as the Modern League right now. The decks that are coming out are so diverse. Goblins top-8'd the Classic the other day on Star City Games. When people can feel free to be this creative again, that's a sign that what you were doing was being impressive. And so outside of my own bias, it was holding a lot of good decks back. And so I'm happy to see people brewing and being creative. And, none of that would have been possible if Deathrite was still around.
Absolutely. I think that Deathrite... There are 2 real categories of cards that get banned. There are sort of covert operators of the format, your Brainstorms, for example, your Gitaxian Probes, for example. I think that those are more covert. They're more behind the scenes. Then there are your overt, I run this place, Bloodbraid Elf, Green Sun Zenith, Hypergenesis.
Birthing Pod,
Birthing Pod is another great example. Yeah. And Deathrite Shaman is definitely in that category of, we run this. This is ours.
Well, speaking of Bloodbraid Elf, there were people for years that felt like the only reason Bloodbraid was banned was because it was paying for Deathrite sins. Yeah. There were people that were saying, had that not happened, this card would have been fine. And so there were some people with their little tinfoil hats on with that theory, too.
That theory may have been borne out as we've unbanned Bloodbraid Elf in Modern, and it's fine. Without Deathrite. Deathrite enabling turn 2 Lilianas and turn 3 Bloodbraid Elves in Modern. Obviously was a huge player in the Jund Pro Tour, where basically a quarter of the decks were some variant of Jund. That was, of course, the second Sunrise Stanislav Sivka Pro Tour. Now recently banned in Legacy. Just a huge banned and restricted all-star.
Let's move on here to number 6. Ruben, what's number 6?
My number 6 is a card that has been printed a bunch. It was originally printed in Urza Saga, but it wasn't broken when it was printed in Urza Saga. It was reprinted in a bunch of sets, even most recently in Battle Bond. It was reprinted. But the problem came when it was shifted down in rarity to common for Eternal Masters. And, I was born to make mistakes, not to fake perfection. Shout out to Drake. Because Peregrine Drake.
Oh.
Peregrine Drake is a 4 colorless and a blue 2/3 creature with flying, creature type Dreezy.
Hey-yo.
When Peregrine Drake enters the battlefield, untap up to 5 lands. Tables turn, bridges burn, you live and learn. And it's just...
Wow.
we'll keep going through those. I got a list, but that really took over the Pauper format when it got downshifted in rarity.
Yeah, it did.
Evan knows more than most, obviously being a Pauper aficionado, and it really just completely ran those streets for a couple of months before it was banned in 2016 in November. And yeah, the Pauper band list is one of the best. I think the Pauper band list is the best curated of the band list. I think that there are when you look at the Pauper band list, you're like, yep, all of those cards should be banned, and all of these shouldn't. The ones that aren't. I think that one's the one that people are just like, yep, we're good. That's what it should be. And Peregrine Drake being on that band list lives up to that hype.
Yeah, I remember I was doing the Community Super League at the time with my friends from the Girlfriend Bracket, and we were having to get ready for Pauper Week. And one of my friends played Pauper much more than I did. And this is when the deck was in its heyday, the Peregrine deck. And my friend was like, just kind of going over the possibilities. Like, you can play deck A, you can play deck B, or you can play this deck. And I was like, all right, what does it do? And he's like, well, you're not going to want to play it for two reasons. He's like, one, there's a lot of triggers, so Magic Online can't handle it. And two, chat will hate you. And I was like, why? And so he had the deck in paper, and so he started going through it. And then once he demonstrated the loop, I was like, oh. And part of being on the Super Leagues is you have to kind of balance between being good and entertaining chat. And I could tell just as he was going through the motion that the viewers would have hated this, just the way that it worked and how broken it was. And I was like, yeah, we can't play that.
Yeah, essentially you can cast Ghostly Flicker targeting Mnemonic Wall and Peregrine Drake. Wall returns the flicker right back to your hand. Drake untaps more mana than the flicker costs, so you get infinite mana. And then you do something else infinite times, like Muldrifter or Seagate Oracle or Prophetic Prism.
Or cast a spell with Storm.
Right.
Something along those
or you
lines.
just play a Storm card. And so and
the most ironic part of this is that earlier that same year, they also banned Cloud of Fairies, which also had the untapped land mechanic.
For similar reasons.
And they were just like, well, the fact that Cloud of Fairies is 2 instead of 5 will make the combo slower. And it's like, it doesn't matter. You still need a Mnemonic Wall in play. Yeah. So, like, who cares?
Yeah.
I mean,
you would enchant your lands and do all sorts of stuff and play Ravnica bounce lands and stuff.
Right.
But Peregrine Drake, like, it did infuse the Pauper community for like 5 minutes, and then we're like, oh God, we broke it, and it just broke, and we had to wait for Wizards to finally come around, and we're just like, please, Wizards, please, these decks are ridiculous. It's not good. It's not fair. And it's a fun card. It's beautiful. The new Battle Bond printing, and I think that's even from Eternal Masters. That art is fan-freaking-tastic, but man, it has no space in Pauper. Get out of here. All right. So, Aaron, what's your number 6?
Ruben.
Uh-oh.
Yes, hi.
Uh-oh.
September 2003... or March of 2003 was a very sad time for both of us. Your beloved Earthcraft was banned in Legacy, was also restricted in Vintage. I also lost a card that day. This card was restricted in Vintage, banned in Legacy, is no longer on the list. But when I think about it, and I've actually used this card to great effect, there was a lot of concern about this deck becoming more popular after the Deathrite Shaman ban. People had concerns about Reanimator. People love to think that Deathrite somehow kept Reanimator in check. It didn't. And so, there's been a lot of talk about this deck becoming popular. People seem to be hating it out of the format, but when you think about this card, it's no surprise to me that it was once restricted and banned and isn't anymore. Sorry, Ruben. My number 6 is Entomb. So Entomb costs 1 black, and it's an instant. It says search your library for a card and put that card in your graveyard and shuffle your library. So if you're playing a Dark Ritual deck, you do 1 for Entomb, 1 for Reanimate, pass. Like, do you know how scary that is? Like, do you understand how frightening that is? I can understand why this was once restricted and banned. It's one thing if you're playing Careful Study or Faithless Looting, where you have to actually have the creature in your hand, or you have to have a way to get the creature. No, you can keep so many hands with Entomb, because whatever fatty you want to get, you can go and look for. Or if you're in really desperate times, you can find a Faithless Looting to help you get out of the situation. And the card is just so versatile and really enables those busted stuff. starts, where if it cost a red or if it cost a blue, you couldn't do, the swamp, dark ritual, terrifying thing that they're doing in Reanimator right now. The new art most recently was in Eternal Masters, I believe. Seb McKinnon killing it. This is what I'm going to get the playmat when his Kickstarter's done. But Entomb is a very scary card and was restricted and was banned for very good reason.
I mean,
for sure.
They couldn't make it any cheaper. They literally made it as cheap
instant,
instant,
and a turn, just
one mana.
Instant, 1 mana, search your library. I'm sensing a theme with your list, by the way, in case that wasn't clear, with the crop rotation and the Entomb, both of whom deserve spots on these lists. Yeah, Entomb is a scary card. Been the central piece of several decks, been a supporting piece of lots of other decks. Lots of those land decks have actually used Entomb to put things like Light from the Low, more specific Silver Bullet hate cards into the graveyard as well. Not to mention Reanimator, World Gorger Dragon combo, of course, used in Tomb, was a centerpiece of those Graveborn Premium Deck Series decks as well. Yeah, well deserving of a spot.
I appreciate sort of that one hand, the Seb McKinnon one hand up. It's very the end of Carrie, the end of Friday the 13th. Sorry if I'm spoiling movies
very
that are
cinematic.
Older than me or whatever. It's fine. But just saying, it's a really cool image. Yeah. All right, so number 6. And I have a feeling sometimes, when it comes to bands, you have cohorts. You know what I mean? You have X and Y were banned because X plus Y was ridiculous. Then there's some cohorts that just kind of go together, sort of, peas and carrots style. And yeah, there's not many cards, and I think there's just the one in which I made a whole video that I told the world they're never going to ban Jace the Mind Sculptor. They're never. Why would you do? We got a standard. You know how long it had been since they had standard bans? It'd been like 5 years. Wizards done nothing but build up the community and build up the game and push these crazy planeswalkers as far as they could push. They're never. This is the Mickey Mouse of Magic. They banned Jace the Mind Sculptor. And it's 2 blue, 2 generic mana. God help you if you never heard this one. It has 3 loyalty. It is of course, mythic legendary planeswalker of Jace. +2, look at the top card of target player's library. You may put that card on the bottom of that player's library. 0, draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. -1, return target creature to its owner's hand. And yes, it has 4 abilities. -12, exile all cards from target player's library. Then that player shuffles his or her hand into his or her library. This card is ridiculous. This card is insane. It's not format warping now, but in Modern. And when they unbanned it, trust me, if you're hearing this years from now, when they unbanned it, people were like, oh my God. Mm-hmm. The format is dead. It's going to be a post-Jace metagame, and it's going to be Jace decks versus non-Jace decks, and the world's going to end, blah, blah, blah. Because when this was in Standard, alongside essentially Cawblade, then Stoneforge Mystic was the cohort. Right. This card was just insane, and it's been a Cube All-Star, will always be a Cube All-Star. This card does basically everything.
Legacy All-Star, too. Because Legacy, honestly, is a slightly slower format than Modern.
Wow. Or you haven't lived until you play Vintage. You can get it out on turn 1.
That, too.
I mean, in Cube, I'm just like, yes, please, with my Soul Ring turn to Jace, and usually the game's over. You +2, their library, if when they say you can keep it, the game's ended right there. I don't know if you knew that, but the game's over. So, yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. Very few Magic the Gathering cards have rap songs and albums dedicated to them. Of course, Jace the Mind Sculptor is better than all, featuring the artistic stylings of not just Patrick Chapin, but also Bill Bolden, a.k.a. Spruik. Shout out to Spruik, the Bump in the Night podcast. Jace the Mind Sculptor is just absolutely bananas and was a major part of a metagame in which when the best thing that you can be doing is also the most consistent thing that you can be doing, that leads to problems. It had been 6 years since there had been a standard banning. It had, in 2011, it hadn't been since the Affinity bannings, since a card got banned in Standard. And so it was completely reasonable for luminaries such as Evan Irwin to proclaim that it would never be banned. Particularly being the Mickey Mouse of Magic, but since then we've had other Mickey Mouses. For example, Emrakul, the big bad of Eldritch Moon and the return to Innistrad block, was also banned, even though it was a centerpiece, even though it was the piece de resistance of the block for being too powerful. Sometimes when you want your main character to be the big thing that people play, sometimes you go too far. Jace the Mind Sculptor, perfect poster boy for that.
It's also the standard by by which other planeswalkers with 4 abilities are judged. You know, I remember when that the green and black Garrett came out, Apex Predator, and people were going, well, it's no Jace. And then, you know, Chandra Torch of Defiance came out, and people were like, is this the new Jace? And so anytime a planeswalker has 4 abilities, it immediately gets compared to Jace the Divine Sculptor, similar to how whenever a 3-mana planeswalker comes out and it gets immediately compared to Liliana the Veil. It is a standard that, you know, every card after it that's even remotely close to it is somehow forced to try to live up to.
And it's a standard that no one can live up to.
No.
Yeah, it's the first one that they ever made with 4 abilities, and whew, it's just, you know, and you can go back and I did interviews with Wizard staff, and we can talk about the whole saga. It's all right there in the YouTube channel. But so much digital ink has been spilt, and it's just a great card. It's also one of those cards that Wizards, like, actively, after a while, was like, okay, stop. We don't want to push Jace the Mind Sculptor anymore. Like, they're, like, actively pulling it out of marketing material and stuff, and it's like, yeah, nowadays they're kind of warming back up to Jace, but there for a while, but, you know, after it got banned and stuff, they really did actively say, can you not really publish the Jace the Mind Sculptor now? Remember when they made silver coins with Jace the Mind Sculptor on them? Remember how stupid that was? God, that's just one of the stupidest things. I just remember, I was like, remember they made those silver coins like somebody lost a bet at Wizards and they do something stupid? Oh my God. All right, let's move over here to number 5. Ruben, what's your number 5?
So we're going to move from maybe the most iconic character in Magic the Gathering to a character you've probably forgotten, a character whom has not been a multi-format all-star, really was like a single-format all-star, but was a format-dominating all-star. One of very few creatures to have ever been banned in any format, whether that format is Mercadian Masks block constructed or not. Lynn Sivvy, Defiant Hero, defined the world in which she existed. Lynn Sivvy, Defiant Hero, is a colorless white legendary creature, human rebel. Has 2 abilities, is also a 1/3. Pay X and tap, search your library for a rebel permanent card with converted mana cost X or less, and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Also has the ability pay 3 colorless. Puts target rebel card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. Of course, Lynn Sivvy, Defiant Hero's main claim to fame was winning Pro Tour Chicago in 2000 in the hands of Kai Bude in a Rebels mirror against Camille Cornelison in the finals of that tournament. 4 copies of Lynn Sivvy, Defiant Hero in those decks. And of course, this was another rules update. The Legend rule has gone through lots of histrionics. Check out Ristic Studies, the Magic Man Sam's discussion on Mirror Gallery, for example, of all of the different ways that Legends have been treated over the years. This one in particular, there are very few times that a card that is so powerful that not only are you playing 4 of them, but you're playing another card or 2 specifically for the mirror match, not just the mirror match, but for that card. And of course, Kai Bude had a copy of Rebel Informer in his main deck, which is a black card, and he had no black mana in his deck, but was using it to be able to get rid of opposing Lynn Sivvies because of the way the Legend rule worked at the time. Whoever's Lynn Sivvy came into play first, that one stuck. Yeah. Other ones would just die. They wouldn't trade off like during Geist of St. Traft era. It's not like today where you can have one on opposing sides of the board. It was just whichever one sticks first, that's the one that's in play. And Lynn Sivvy, Defiant Hero, defined an era of Magic, certainly should have been banned in Mercadian Masks block constructed. Might be the most powerful card in a vacuum from Nemesis. Obviously, today Daze is much more powerful, but I think that Lynn Sivvy getting her day in the sun is worth mentioning.
I believe it worked in that when you had your copy out, they could not play their copy.
They couldn't play their copy.
Right. You literally had to just stare at it. You couldn't just do anything about it. And they were finally like, well, just make them both die. And so then for a while, they both died. And then finally it was like, fine, everybody can have a Planeswalker. And then or legendary creature on their side. And then it was like, everybody can have all the Planeswalkers on. You can have a bunch of Jaces on your side. Who cares? You know, it's like, all right, whatever. You take that flavor and shove it.
Yeah.
All right. Aaron, what's your number 5?
So the first 5 cards on my list were eventually pulled off of the ban list. My next 5 are still on the ban list to various degrees. Different formats, things like that. And my number 5 was banned in Two-Headed Giant back in September 2005. Currently banned in Commander. Brewers, like my friend Daniela Diaz and Rich Shea, have been known to play with this card in their respective formats, being Modern and Vintage. Formats where it's very easy to cast lots of spells, especially blue cantrips. And this is a card that is very bizarre. I had to kind of look at this, and I'm still not really sure what I'm looking at, but I do understand what it does. This is something I think might have a place in Evan's heart because it's Kamigawa. My number 5 is Ireo Soratami Ascendant. So this is a weird little number. So it's got this flip concept to it. So it starts off as Ireo, if I understand it correctly. They are a legendary creature, Moonfolk Monk. Power and toughness 1/1. It costs 1 and a blue. Flying. Whenever the 4th spell of a turn is played, you flip it. And you flip it over, and it turns into Ireo's Essence, and it says counter. It becomes a legendary enchantment. Still has power and toughness. I'm not really clear as what's going on here.
It's just an enchantment at that point. It
just
changes
types.
Just an enchantment.
Okay, thank you. And then it says something different. It says counter the first spell played by each opponent each turn.
She turns into an egg.
Right.
Does anybody notice she turns into an egg?
My friend Daniela has been playing this. She loves to play these blue decks with Thing in the Ice, where it's very easy to just cast 4 spells and then whoop. And people who aren't used to the spell are not used to having the first spell they play every turn just automatically getting countered. It's very easy to see why this is broken in Commander when you're playing with 3 or 4 people. It's very easy to flip this, and when 3 people can't do anything for the first turn, that's a really, really big deal. This is a very unique card. It's a very unusual card, but I understand why it's a little busted.
It's just kind of like really annoying. Like, I mean, in Commander, like you don't even have to play any spells. They could play the 4 spells, and you'd be like, oh yeah, by the way, and then it's each
and that's
turn.
Anybody. It doesn't even have to be you playing the 4 spells.
It's just any of them. So this card's just it's like annoying. It's weird.
Yeah.
It's like, go away.
But Kamigawa though.
Yeah, what's up? Love Kamigawa. It's so good. So yeah, and it's just funny to me. She turns into an egg. It'd been kind of cool if it was legendary enchantment egg or something, but or spirit. I don't know. Like make it cute.
Right.
But yeah, Ireo is really interesting. But for my number 5, if you want to get broke, let me tell you. When I left Magic, I didn't talk about Magic. I didn't see Magic. I didn't really discuss Magic. Maybe I've seen it like behind the counter at a bookstore somewhere, right? Came back the day that they previewed a card in Darksteel. And I was like, I don't know what happened to Magic, but this card has to be broken in half. They previewed Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp is a 1 generic mana, uncommon artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/-1. And whenever it dies, whenever the equipped creature is put into a graveyard, draw 2 cards. You equip it for a singular mana. And I was like... Now this, again, I hadn't talked about Magic in like 7-8 years or something, long time. It'd been a minute. Well, maybe not that long, but it'd been a minute. And I was like, what did you do to the game? That this is like what you're like, you guys get to play around with this. I'm like, play anywhere else and you kill it, draw cards, anything to draw cards. This is the poster child of never make late game changes to cards. This is the number 1, and they've done it so many times. Even after this, they've done it. They do this weird thing where they're like, it used to be +1/+1, and for whatever reason, they tried to make a downside of shrinking the toughness, therefore killing the X1s, therefore drawing you the cards so you can go completely nuts. So just nothing really right about what's going on with Skull Clamp, and it was nice to know that when I came back to Magic, I was like, what? That was the right reaction.
I have this in my Locust God EDH deck, where you have the infinite combo of Ashnod's Altar, Skull Clamp, and there's something else. Ashnod's Altar, Skull Clamp,
the Locust God.
Is that how it goes? Yeah, because you draw 2 cards and then it forms the loop. Yeah. And so if people don't stop that, God help you. And I've had it happen before. I have it in my Marchesa deck as well for killing off my Assassin tokens or killing off my Assemble the Legion tokens. I didn't get to experience it in any sort of competitive capacity, but it's certainly done wonders in Commander, to where if it's good in that environment, I can only imagine what it was like when it was in a 60-card competitive format.
It was absurd when it was in 60-card formats.
Young Peasy.
Elfin Nail was a popular. I mean, even just running it by itself, it was just just a good card. You didn't need to support it in any way. It was obviously one of the 15 cards in From the Vault Exiled. And while some of the cards in From the Vault Exiled are a little bit of head scratchers, like, did we really need to feature Curd Ape having once been banned in format, or like Serendib Ifrit? Skull Clamp, though, that one's one that you look at and you're like, yep, that's a card we can ban. That's a card that is ban worthy. It's also one of the cards that people try to brew around the most in no banned list modern. And I know that other than the Eldrazi decks, the Skull Clamp decks are a big popular feature of that format as well.
Yeah, and this is, and to sort of give you that kind of like sort of super cute halcyon glaze over how it took me a minute to kind of get back into Magic culture and see where we're at. I had created an account on Magic Online, and I immediately bought 4 Skull Clamp because I was like, this looks like the coolest, funnest card to run ever, you guys, golly gee willikers. And built my like little crappy affinity deck with just all the commons, because of course the whole deck was almost commons. And and I was just playing it in like the fun, play anything standard or whatever. And every time I play a Skull Clamp on turn 1, they would always rage quit, or they would scream names at me and rage quit. And I was like, I just wanted to play with a little deck. I'm sorry.
Love you.
I'm sorry if it's broken. It's a nice toy. Let me toy. I could never play with my deck, and I couldn't have any fun with it because they would always rage quit and they hated it. So that's what Skull Clamp does for you right there. Creates animosity.
Yeah, it sure does.
Oh, all right. So, Ruben, what's number 4?
My number 4, I think, is maybe the most, in terms of its legality, in terms of its existence and its relationship within Magic, might have the most unique relationship with the banned list of any Magic card at all. It's the first card, as far as I can tell, to ever be banned. By itself, in terms of power level. Like, obviously they started out the banned list with getting rid of anti-cards and stuff, and there was a big Ali from Cairo and Ancestral Recall and all those cards at the beginning. But there were some cards that were on that list that didn't really make any sense, and then they were like, all right, we actually figured it out this time. We're going to restrict Channel, we're going to restrict Demonic Tutor, we're going to restrict a couple other cards, we're going to unrestrict Icy Manipulator, and we're going to ban Time Vault on March 23rd, 1994.
Time Vault.
In addition, we're going to unban it in Vintage, but change it, errata it, to add a time counter, like it's Minamo, the School at Water's Edge, or whatever. And then later, we're going to change how it works again. And we're going to ban it in Legacy, and then we're going to re-restrict it in Vintage. And then we're going to change how it works again. Card is ridiculous. Card is way too powerful. And in fact, Cube, a format in which most people say, you know what, this is the home for all of the most powerful cards of all time, it's not in most cubes because they think it's too powerful for Cube. That is saying something.
It's an awful way to lose, too. It feels terrible when you're playing Vintage and someone just, whoop, Voltaic Key, Time Vault. It's like, oh. Like,
yeah, this is another.
So what does it do,
Voltaic Key was on the banned list because of this card. All right, here's what it does. It's a 2-mana artifact that enters the battlefield tapped. And it doesn't untap during your untap step. Well, that's not very impressive. I wonder what else it does. If you would begin your turn while Time Vault is tapped, you may skip that turn instead if you do untap Time Vault and has the activated ability of tap, take an extra turn after this one.
Yeah.
So, of course, Voltaic Key skips all that early, that paragraph of text early, just lets you untap it, lets you take an extra turn, untap your Voltaic Key, untap your Time Vault, take nigh infinite turns. Just take the rest of the turns of the game, basically. Also works with things like Ral's Eric or Twitch or things like that just say untap a Time Vault. And as a result, it is a very cheap, easy, colorless combo that allows a turn 1, turn 2 victory in Vintage and other formats in which it's legal.
And this was open during the beta draft at GP Vegas in 2018, as I recall.
Sure.
As one of those, at least I think so. But yeah, then of course it's on the reserve list, so I never want to see it printed again. It's like $6,000 for an alpha version or something. And that's just as of this writing. God knows what it is in a couple years as MTG finance becomes insane.
Yeah.
But Time Vault in and of itself, yes, I've seen cubes where they're like, we're not going to do this because Time Vault is either broken in your deck or it is unplayable because you don't want to pay a thing you have to skip your turn with.
Exactly right.
Yeah, there you go. Aaron, what's number 4?
So I talked a bit on the show about how we run the gamut of cards that used to be banned, aren't banned anymore, and sort of the collective theme of why is this here? Most of the cards on the list we can appreciate. At one point, were very powerful, but then there are cards you still look at and you're like, why is this banned? I don't really get it. My number 4 was one of those cards. I was going through the Commander ban list because I wanted to make sure that different formats were represented, and I was mousing over certain cards, and I saw this card there, and I had never seen it before. And then I moused over it, and I was like, well, this doesn't, why is this banned in Commander? Because to be banned in Commander, you got to be a particular shade of busted. Prophet of Krufix, things like that. And I'm not getting it. And I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, and then I realized the way the card worked, and I'm like, oh. Number 4 is Biorhythm. So Biorhythm is 6 and 2 green. It's a sorcery from Onslaught. It says each player's life total becomes the number of creatures he or she controls. So if y'all ain't got creatures, y'all dead. I love it. Oh my god. And so if you have any way to wipe the board, if you have any way to do that, you can literally just end the game. Just be like, all right, y'all ain't here anymore. You have no creatures. Or let's say they don't have very many creatures. Well, how many you got? You're at 2. Yeah, you're at 2 now. And if you're playing green, obviously green is the color of ramp. So getting to 8 mana is not very difficult. But when it really dawned on me what this card did, now I understand why it's banned in Commander, because oh my god.
So I got a Biorhythm story.
Do you?
Back in the day, they had states/champs, and you could play to be your state champion. Yeah. And by God, I'm driving to Nashville. I'm going to be the Tennessee state champion, y'all.
You reckon? Yeah.
Woo! Getting out of this bucket of syrup with Fireman Angel. Fireman Angel is a card that at the beginning of your upkeep, if she's in your graveyard, you gain a life. And therefore, if you have a whole bunch of them, you gain a whole bunch of life. And Ravnica Standard could be very, very, very slow. And you could just kind of take advantage of these super long, super grindy, whatever type matches. And I'm playing in the top 8 I'm playing for the top 8 of states that year. And this is the winning in, And I'm just I'm 94 life or something. And then, of course, the guy, he kind of sort of exasperatingly, he wraths the board because he has to, or he's going to die because he's 2 or whatever. And then, so I draw, I do my thing, I spend all my mana to do whatever, I'm up to 97 go, and then he draws his card, and every person behind him just loses their mind and freaks out as he taps 8 mana, and I die from his 2 life because he has Biorhythm, and I was dead.
I love it.
That's what happened, and that's how dreams die. So fine, kill that card with fire, I don't like it.
One of my more favorite Mike Flores brews was a Rith's Charm Windbrisk Heights Biorhythm deck that he tried to get to be a thing and extended. Rith's Charm is basically an instant speed, put 3 1/1s onto the battlefield. And so you would end of turn, Rith's Charm, untap your Windbrisk Heights, attack with your 3 1/1s, and then turn up a Biorhythm, which was adorable. It is possible to play a turn. It is possible to play a turn 2 Biorhythm in Modern. I have seen a couple of meme decks trying to do such a thing. With things like Magus of the Vineyard and Utopia Sprawl and lots of the quick mana kind of stuff. It's an interesting card, and certainly in a format like Commander, definitely needs to be banned.
Just busted, man. Card can go away. Don't care. Now, my number 4. We're getting the biggies. We're in big time territory up in here. And to me, this card it's a pillar of the format. It could very well be a foundation of a format. A card that was restricted for the most powerful format, but for the slightly less most powerful format is cool and is in fact an entire gentleman's agreement. That we will keep it in place and will never ban Brainstorm in Legacy, but it's been restricted in Vintage for a long time because this card is broken, and it's still busted in Legacy, but again, no one actually wants to talk about that. They talk about other stuff, so they ban other things, which is fine. And also hashtag Justice for Earthcraft. Brainstorm is a blue instant that says draw 3 cards on it. Now we can just stop right there. you know it's going to be good. But you draw 3 cards, and you put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. If you notice, that's Jace's free ability. This card is here because Brainstorm runs Legacy. Like America runs on Duncan, Legacy be running on Brainstorm because they can't leave the house without it. This is why the blue dual lands are insane. This is why you'll never see a blue deck without them, because you shouldn't. This is why entire monster articles are written about how to brainstorm, how to do things, and Brainstorm has just an unbelievable pedigree.
It's funny, when I was so I've been known to dabble with Ad Nauseam Tendrils in Storm, which is surprisingly good right now post-ban, and nobody's talking about it. I'm telling you, it's the real deal. But when I was learning how to play Ad Nauseam Tendrils, you know, one of the most difficult things for me about learning how to play the deck wasn't even the Storm part. Like, I knew how to chain spells together. I knew how to chain rituals together and keep track of my mana pool. I wasn't a blue mage, so I didn't know how to brainstorm. And so there were so many times where, like, I didn't know that, like, your land order, you don't want to crack your fetches. We're so programmed to just crack your fetches at the end of your turn, like a habit. Oh no, there are times where, like, you want to brainstorm, you don't want to get brainstorm locked. So, like, let's say you draw and you drew trash. Well, you put the trash back on top, then you crack, shuffle your deck, and get some good things. And that was honestly the hardest part of learning how to play Ant, was learning how to brainstorm, which sounds silly, but, like, I'd never done it before.
It's tough. Like, this card is insane.
AJ Soccer has written tens of thousands of words on brainstorming and how to brainstorm profitably and how to do it correctly. It is such a skill-intensive card. It is such an iconic card that it is the reason why Jace the Mind Sculptor is on the list, is because of that 0 mana ability that is essentially the text to brainstorm. The fetch lands plus brainstorm combination is the reason why mana bases look the way they do in Legacy. Mm-hmm. It is so ubiquitous. It is so overarching. It's the kudzu of the format in that it covers everything. There is no fast lands. There's no other option. You need fetch land, dual land mana base, primarily because of cards like Brainstorm.
All right. So let's move on here to our number 3. Ruben, what's your number 3?
So it takes quite a special card to, before it's even opened in a pack, before anyone has their hands on it, this card was featured on a list of banned watch list cards. Wizards used to have a watch list of cards that were in danger of being banned. Before you could open Yawgmoth's Bargain in packs, it was written in Scry magazine and I think Duelist magazine that Yawgmoth's Bargain was already going to be on the watch list. Like, we are already there, folks. This card is too good, so we got to keep an eye on it. And, of course, eventually, it did ultimately get banned and restricted, and then ultimately unbanned, or unrestricted, I should say, in Vintage recently. Mm-hmm. It is a, it's in the school of necropotence, or necropotence, as Aaron would say, with Gristlebrand, greed, that sort of effect. But Yawgmoth's Bargain has the most simple lines of text of any of them. Mm-hmm. It's 4 colorless, black enchantment from Urza's Destiny. Skip your draw step. Pay 1 life. Draw a card.
Sounds good to me.
That's it. That's the bargain you're making with Yawgmoth.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And this card is broken. This is we fixed necropotence, guys. We took away the drawback.
We made it twice as expensive.
Yeah, but now you just keep going, and it's like, wow, that's not going to break. Oh God, it broke everything. And it's
the only thing sweeter. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, the only thing sweeter than casting this card is watching somebody whiff on this card.
Sure.
I think Reed Duke, even recently, during the last night against the Hornet Queens, I think he drew like 17 cards and then promptly scooped.
Yeah.
And made it to like the top of Magic Reddit that were like, how? A resolve bargain when you're playing Storm is supposed to be game over, because you don't have to, assuming you find what you need and assuming you have the life to pay for all those cards, you have the pieces to go off where you're not going to discard, you're not going to care about your life. And, I've learned that a bargain is not necessarily game over, that it is possible to draw that many cards and whiff.
There is, one of the things that you learn as you become a better Magic player is you make them have it. Like, you're going to kill me, you have to have it. If you're going to kill me on the next swing, you have to swing at me, because you might misclick if you're on Magic Online, or you might just accidentally lose your mind and forget to attack with a creature or something. Like, I've seen weird things happen. Make them kill you.
With that said, Yawgmoth's Bargain usually kills you.
Yeah, usually. Like, we're talking 98% of the time.
A lot of percentage of the time.
Big percent.
Card is bananas.
Aaron, what's number 3?
I've been very open about the fact that Living End in Modern was my first taste of broken stuff. Like, I'd been a pretty good girl up until that point. You know, I played my fair decks. I played my mid-range decks. I played Jund and Standard, you know. But that was my first taste of doing things that the good Lord never intended for people to do, and I loved it. And the problem when you play broken decks is you keep chasing higher highs. You know, the same high doesn't cut it for you after a while. Eventually, you want to keep chasing more broken things. And when I was taking part in the Community Super League, we had no Modern ban list week, and so we were allowed to play anything you wanted to, and so naturally I gravitated towards my number 3, also being another suspend card, and also finding ways to cascade into it with spells like Violent Outburst. And I was pleased to find that the high I got from resolving this spell was as good or better than the high I experienced the first time I cast Living End. My number 3 is Hypergenesis. So Hypergenesis is a sorcery. It has the weird text of Hypergenesis is green, like some of the suspend cards do, like Living End is black. It's a suspend 3, 1 and 2 green, which means you can pay that and put 3 time counters on it, or you can cascade into it with something like Violent Outburst or Dawn, something Dawn, isn't there?
There's something, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
And a
there's a
cascade
whole
spell.
Starting with you, each player may put an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land card from his or her hand into play. Repeat this until no one puts a card into play. All right, great. So Ashen Rider, you go. Oh, it's my turn again? Okay, Emrakul, you go. And just some of the things I was able to do was just amazing. This card was banned in Modern as of June 2010. June 2011 it was banned and extended. 10 it was banned and extended. 11 it was banned in Modern, rightfully so. Hasn't really done much in Legacy. It's not banned or restricted in Legacy, but I just was so impressed with this card, and I had to play it a little differently. But just some of the dumb things, again, you're able to do just whoop, whoop. And if your opponent's not playing, they're probably not playing things with the same power level, so you're just dropping things they have no earthly way to deal with, and it just feels spectacular.
This card is busted. This card has never been legal in Modern. I don't want to ever see it legal in Modern.
It's fine.
It's fine in Legacy, because whatever. But like,
yeah, exactly.
Not in a world that you want to actually have a little bit of control and showcase some decks that aren't just dumb and busted.
It was also banned in Old Extended, right?
Whew.
Sure.
Yeah, it was banned in Old Extended, and then Extended died. You know, as we know.
Correct.
But yeah, Hypergenesis is nuts. My number 3, though. Again, talking about formats, talking about pillars of formats, talking about cards that are required to play in certain formats. And this one's cool because they originally restricted it, and then they've unrestricted it. And now there's the whole, like, would you restrict it already, but they won't do it, but they talk about it, but they won't do it because, and Vintage ain't nothing like a Mishra's Workshop. Mishra's Workshop, this land is stupid. This land is dumb. They made it in Antiquities. Of course, it's on a reserve list, so it's worth $1 million, which also means you can get it online for like $2, whatever, as you do. Mishra's Workshop is amazing. It was originally printed in Antiquities. Of course, it's a rare. It is a land that says tap, add 3 colorless mana. That is the Wingding mana. Spend this mana only to cast artifact spells. And turns out, when you get your kind of Black Lotus land, and they're not making less artifacts, which means whenever they make any artifact for 3 or less mana, you go, Mishra's Workshop? And they make Walking Ballista, and you're like, I guess we're going to do Mishra's Workshop now, because we can do this on turn 1, and it's really cool.
Foundry Inspector. You can drop a turn 1 Foundry Inspector, and then all your spells cost 1 less. Like, that was supposed to be a drawback. Like, that was supposed to affect you somehow. Like, only artifacts. Like, cool.
Yeah, which is insane. So, like, Mishra's Workshop, again, this to me is a pillar of Vintage. Vintage would not be the same if you ever restricted this card. People buy into Vintage as a way, and when they get their 4 workshops, that's like the thing that you do. You're playing the Mud deck, you got your workshops. That's what you got to do. You got to spend your, $6,000 now for your play set?
Yeah, just $1 billion for sure.
Yeah.
God.
This is one of the main cards around the central discussion of if they, with the reserve list, and sort of a conversation off of the topic of the reserve list of, if they print Magic cards with the newly proposed arena style back, can they print new workshops? Can they print these cards? And yeah, this is one of the main ones revolving around the center of that discussion.
Yeah. So, sorry. So let's move on here to number 2. Turns out when we have no hires or sames, things take a little while.
Yeah.
So, another card that goes along with Mishra's Workshop in that it's busted. But this one is so busted, they didn't unrestrict it. They ain't going to give you no Billy with the format with this stupid card. It's insane. And again, even it's $70 right now, and of course a quarter online. I love that. I get it 25 cents. It's terrific.
Of course.
But the card itself is another one of those, like, I really try to put myself in the mindset of what in the hell Mark Rosewater was thinking when he signed Urza's block. I don't know. What were you thinking when you made Tolarian Academy? Tolarian Academy is just insane. It's just insane. It's a legendary land, originally a rare from Urza's Saga, that says tap : add 1 blue to your mana pool for each artifact you control. It's so simple, but it makes 1,000,000 mana. And why would you ever unleash something like that onto the world? Like, this card is nuts.
It's my opinion that, again, it was meant to sort of be a drawback where it's like, you're not going to have that many artifacts out, right, you guys? And then, like, you cut to a format where everybody's running 0-cost artifacts and everybody's running 1-cost artifacts, and it's not difficult to get that out at all. And, yeah.
It's just, it's so hard to look back and go, God, you didn't see that?
Yeah. It was also printed. They were like, I mean, it doesn't tap for anything by itself. The turn you play it, you need to have other support around it. How broken can it be? Turns out very broken. Urza's block constructed banned all 3 of the variants of Tolarian Academy, the others being Sarah's Sanctum and Gaia's Cradle, and obviously Tolarian Academy being the most powerful of them, also restricted everywhere and banned everywhere that it can possibly be banned.
Yeah, I mean, banned in Commander, banned in Legacy, banned in 1v1 Commander, of course. Like, this is not a card that does fair things. Tolarian Academy not known for fair stuff.
Single-handedly turns the tide, too. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people play a Null Rod thinking they had the last laugh of, well, you can't top your Moxen. And they're like, they just drop an Academy, and they're like, cool, I'll still make 6 blue, thanks. Yeah. And it's like, oh, just ouch.
Also responsible for the namesake of the Tolarian Community College, as a reference to the Tolarian Academy, the most popular YouTube channel in the Magic the Gathering sphere. So still having an impact on the zeitgeist of Magic, even decades after it was banned.
Hell yeah. All right. Ruben, what's your number 2?
My number 2, again, has a unique relationship with the banned and restricted list because it's such a weirdo. It is so strange that it was already banned alongside what was called we're all familiar with the Power 9. Mm-hmm. There's also the Anti-9. There are 9 anti-cards. They are not legal anywhere. You can never play any of them ever. They are Contract from Below, Dark Pact, Demonic Attorney, Jeweled Bird, Bronze Tablet, Rebirth, Tempest Ifrit, Amulet of Quos, and Temerian Fiends. And in addition to those 9 cards, on the very, very first banned list, not restricted like Ali from Cairo, not restricted like Time Vault, not restricted like Ruck Egg, but actually banned, you cannot play copies in 1994 of Shahrazad.
Yes.
Later, they unbanned Shahrazad alongside Divine Intervention. And later they also unbanned it alongside Underworld Dreams, Ivory Tower, and Mirror Universe in Legacy for whatever reason. And then they rebanned it because the card is ridiculous. Yeah. Shahrazad, it's a weirdo. And let me tell you why it's so weird. It's white for a sorcery from Arabian Nights. Players play ignore all the text that's actually on the card. Players play a Magic sub-game using their libraries as their decks. Each player who doesn't win the sub-game loses half their life, rounded up. That's it. That's the end of the card.
This card right now.
Enter the dungeon.
As we speak, the original artwork for this card is being auctioned off. It is worth, currently, the last bid I saw was $16,000.
Shout out to the folios.
It's up to $19,000 right now.
That was Kaja, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So for those playing along, this definitely embodies the flavor of Arabian Nights. This is actually a tale from the Arabian Nights saga, and the story behind this is Shahrazad was due to marry a prince or a king who was known for marrying women and then killing them after one night because he wanted to make sure they were pure and faithful to him. And so Scheherazade got the idea that she was going to tell the guy a story and keep telling the story to essentially buy herself some more time. And eventually the prince or the king was so enthralled by her story that he demanded she keep telling it. And so many nights eventually passed. And in that time, he realized he loved her and he didn't kill her. And that's sort of the flavor is her telling the story. That's you playing the mini game, which is essentially the story. But I just love this in terms of the artwork, the flavor of it all. And there's just nothing like it.
I miss the Foglios, but I also recognize that it was right for the time.
Yeah, a different time.
It was just a different time. And so it's awesome sort of in a time capsule way to be like, you know what? When I was playing back in the 90s, it was pretty good. It wasn't amazing. It was good. It was really interesting and had a lot of character. Aaron,
and of course, as the most recent Scheherazade story happened during the Loading Ready Run pre-release for Unstable, where Wedge from the Manosaurus used his Spike tournament grinder to go get him a Scheherazade and cast it in the middle of a game, which further added to the card's story.
Yeah, Scheherazade's amazing. Aaron, what's your number 2?
I tried to get into Pauper. I've tried so hard. I've watched everybody around me play Pauper. I've watched the professor talk about Pauper. I'm turning into my friend Kendra. Pauper, you guys. We're to play Pauper. I've tried. I can't get it up for Pauper. I've tried so hard. I've tried playing. I've tried the Boros deck. I've tried the Mono Black deck. Nothing gets me going. And I feel like if I were allowed to do what I want to do in Pauper, maybe I might enjoy it. But unfortunately, there's a family of cards that have been banned in Pauper. You essentially cannot play Storm and Pauper. You just can't. Grape Shot is banned. Empty the Warrens is banned. And this other card is banned as well. And it's one of Evan's favorites. Hashtag Storm and Walmart. My number 2 is Temporal Fissure. So Temporal Fissure is 4 and a blue. It's a sorcery. Most recently printed in Dual Decks, Mind versus Smite. And it's a sorcery. It says return target permanent to its owner's hand, and then it has Storm. So when you cast the spell, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn. You may choose new targets for the copies. This was banned in Pauper in January 2013. And you cannot Storm in Pauper, but if you could, just imagine how much fun you could have with just returning everything to your owner's hand. It's not hard to get a critical mass of spells, and I'm not necessarily going to kill you, but I'm just going to bounce everything. Like, oh my god.
It's just not even look, I've resolved this card, and I'm telling you, it's a good thing they put it in Walmart.
Yeah, Storm and Walmart.
Did I tell you the story? I was at pre-release last weekend, and there were some little boys that were playing Commander, and I was in the back of the store, and I heard one of them make a very disappointed kind of noise, like, "Aw, man," and his friend goes, "It's just a mind's desire, don't worry," and I'm like, and you can fix Storm in Walmart. There are children that are playing these cards and don't understand like the power level.
That's not safe for work.
That's not safe for life. I mean, come on, man. I'm serious. This is like nothing this card does makes anyone feel that good. You know, you're just.
This was a big punchline, by the way, for that Cloud of Fairies Peregrine Drake combo with Ghostly Flicker and Mnemonic Wall, by the way, was to build up a really, really big Temporal Fissure and bounce your entire opponent's board back to their hand. It didn't matter how many they had in play because you had an arbitrary large Storm count. And yeah, Temporal Fissure. Storm in general is just a card that we could have on our top 10 banned and restricted cards list because, you know, nothing Storm has ever done has ever been fair.
It's just ridiculous. And again, I got to perform the combo. I got to play the combo, and it's insane. Like, I would just feel bad. I'm like, all right, and then return all your lands and all your stuff, and okay, thanks, your turn. You know, they had like 14 cards in hand. It's really sad. Storm Walmart, hashtag Storm Walmart. Moving here to number 1. Oh my goodness. Aaron, what's your number 1?
Ruben has his Earthcraft. You know, he has the card that he wants justice for. And I tried really hard to pick cards that I haven't talked about on previous lists, but I had to cover this one. You know, this card was put on the initial ban list for Modern back in August 2011 with no explanation. It didn't do anything wrong. It's not like other cards that did something wrong, like Deathrite Shaman, where they could point to a series of results, or they could point to some sort of dominance. This card was placed on the list out of fear. They anticipated anticipated this card being a problem, and so it's put on the ban list. I think it's fine. I've told Aaron Forsythe that I'm going to make him a PowerPoint presentation as to why this card is fine. It's legal in Legacy, it's legal in Vintage, and it's banned in Modern. It's fine. It's really fine. My number one is Dread Return. So Dread Return is 2/2 black. It's a sorcery. It's so simple and it's so harmless. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Nothing wrong with that. And you can flashback it to sacrifice. You can sacrifice 3 creatures to flashback it. Where's the problem here? Like, do you know how hard it is to get 3 creatures in Modern? I got to get a lot of stars to align to get those Narcomoebas going. Like, you guys have Spell Pierce, you guys have Remand, you're going to be fine. I remember I was watching the VLSL the other day, and LSV hard cast a Dread Return. It was glorious, and I just lived so much. But I truly believe that Dread Return is fine in Modern. It's fine. It's fine. And one of these days, I'm going to convince Aaron Forsythe, and we will be free to reign again.
Well, you are certainly staying #on brand.
Yeah.
And
you are out of your mind.
You are out of your mind.
Did I tell you that a fan once did? Someone sent me some fan art of me riding the Mind Slicer.
Oh my God. This is not a card that is okay. This is not
fine.
It's okay when it's on the ban list and it stays there and it's nice and it's pretty and they can put it in stuff like dual decks. They put it in dual decks, Bless versus Curse. That's fine. Put this in Walmart. This is fine. Have the kids play with this card. They don't care. They don't know.
Take it to Aaron's house. We'll resurrect things. It'll be great.
Yeah, not Storm. Not Storm. Ruben, what's your number one?
You know, I considered having a meme pick, like a joke pick as my number one, and being like, guys, my number one is Rampaging Ferocidon. It's the most powerful thing that's ever been banned. Like, Third Ape has got to be number one, right? You know, Regrowth was banned for a while. Replenish, Felden's Cane. Like, there are some weirdos that have been that are still on the ban list. Like, how offensive is Mind Twist, honestly, right now, in comparison to everything else that people are doing in those formats? It's like Grim Monolith used to be banned. Like, there are some cards that are banned and restricted in certain formats, and you're just like, man, what in the world is going on? But then I realized that there's only been one card that was so busted, so broken, they had to emergency ban it. They had to go back in time and say, you know, we tried. A little history for you. There was a period called Combo Winter, which was a period right when Urza Saga came out, where like all of the decks were super crazy combo decks. Dream Halls was a combo deck that was around the Earthcraft deck. The Fluctuator deck was happening. There was Recurring Nightmare Survival, neither of which we brought up on the show yet.
That's true.
Time Spiral decks. Illusions of Grandeur Donate was a popular. I mean, there were so many combo decks happening that they just were like, all right, enough. Everybody stop. We're banning a ton of things. And then they released Urza's Legacy. And they released a card called Memory Jar. Oh, wow. They said, this is kind of undoing all of the work we tried to do in the last 4 months. We are going to retroactively ban Memory Jar. They still won't call an emergency ban.
Nope. They retroactively added it to the ban list.
Retroactively added to the banned list is Memory Jar. And it's my number one. Memory Jar is a 5-mana artifact originally from Urza's Legacy. Tap and sacrifice Memory Jar. Each player exiles all cards from their hands, face down, and draw 7 cards. At the beginning of the next end step, each player discards their hand and returns to their hand each card exiled in this way. Banned in Legacy, restricted in Vintage.
I'm still not 100% clear as to what it does. Like, whenever someone plays it in Vintage, I just kind of smile and nod.
Well, it's a draw 7. It's a colorless. As you know, in Vintage, draw 7s are very important. Things like Time Twister, things like Wheel of Fortune, all of those are extremely powerful. Memory Jar is a unique animal amongst draw 7s for a number of reasons. One, it is a permanent. More specifically, it's an artifact, so you can go tinker for it. And since it's a permanent, you can play it and then wait a turn if you want to and untap it the next turn.
They also did something similar in Rivals. I think there was the Amnesia card, which was kind of similar to this, and so people were kind of excited about that, and they were like,
trying to break that,
and it didn't really work out, but it was cute.
But of course, the main reason why this particular card was banned was because of the Megrum Broken Jar deck. popularized by Randy Bueller, among others. Basically, because it has you discard all of those cards, it comboed very well with a card called Megrim, which was an uncommon in Stronghold. 2 colorless and a black enchantment. Whenever a player discards a card, they take 2. Or whenever an opponent discards a card, they take 2
14?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so you'd be able to use your Lotus Petals and your Dark Rituals and your Broken Mana and play a Jar and a Megrim, and then make them take 14, and then do it all over again.
I love it.
And you could use Tinkers, and you could use lots of other interesting, quick artifact and black mana alongside your Megrims, alongside Tinker, and it was absolutely broken. Felidar Guardian later had a retroactive banned list relationship of some kind, but I don't think Felidar Guardian really holds a candle to the relationship that the banned list has with Memory Jar.
Well, once upon a time, Wizards doesn't like the reserve list. This is on the reserve list. However, they once kind of flirted with the idea of printing reserve list cards. But the only way they would do that is as a very special premium foil. So From the Vault Relics showed up. From the Vault Relics reprinted Memory Jar. It reprinted Masticore. It reprinted Karn. And that was a big, big deal. They reprinted, if they're going to reprint that, what could they not reprint in these sets? And then they did Phyrexia versus the Coalition, and they did Phyrexia Negator was the front card. So you took a reserve list card, you put it in Walmart for as much as you can sell through. Telling you, man, them roads lead back to Walmart. But and then collectors lost their mind and started yelling at Wizards, and then Wizards says, sorry, we'll never do that again. So this is one of the only few reserve list cards that actually has a second printing, which is really interesting. But was retroactively added, was broken. Certainly. What were you? It was still in the what were you thinking years.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of what were you
Anders' thinking, legacy, so I had to put it at my
number 1. It's broken. Well, look. I tried to think of a card for my number 1 that really just impacted Magic in a very interesting or incredible way. And this one certainly did. This card alone did bloodshed to the player base. It wrecked what we thought constructed Magic and the people who played constructed Magic and people who had fun at Friday Night Magic, and it made people leave the game in droves. Literally just leave the game. They just hated Magic the Gathering because while we certainly talked about the little sort of background guide Disciple of Vault, my number 1 is Arcbound Ravager. Arcbound Ravager, I think the estimate was what was it, half of the competitive players or something, over the course of Affinity?
It was more than that. I think it was close to 60%.
It was huge, and I'm telling you, people just did not show up anymore. They just disappeared. They played against the Arcbound Ravager deck, and I ain't playing this crap anymore because you lose on turn 4. Just dead. Arcbound Ravager, not even put in Affinity decks during testing. During R&D. Someone said, as the set was coming out, ooh, maybe we should try Arcbound Ravager in my Affinity deck. And what? Really? Yep. No kidding. That's the story. And this card is insane. Arcbound Ravager is a 2 generic mana 0/0. It's a rare artifact creature beast. Originally showed up in Darksteel. Sacrifice an artifact : put a +1/+1 counter on it. Modular 1, which means this enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. When it dies, you may put its +1/+1 counters on target artifact creature. So at instant speed, for no mana, you can immediately sacrifice artifacts, you can trigger things like Disciple of the Vault, and you can it just wrecked Standard. It's hard for me to really put it into words because, again, this is when I was coming back to Magic. I was returning to Magic, and I was just seeing it just devastate. People just hated it. People didn't want to play Magic anymore.
I seem to recall an article by Sam Stoddard where it was supposed to cost 3. And then at the last minute, you mentioned those last minute decisions, Evan, they turned it to 2. It single-handedly also changes the combat math. When you're playing with things like Steel Overseer, which can distribute counters, or you're playing with Walking Ballista, you think you know what's going on with the board state, you think you understand how combat's going to go, and then the math starts coming into play, and then you see it starting to eat artifacts, and it's free. That ability to eat things does not cost anything, and so you might think that combat's going to work in your favor, and then things start getting sacrificed, counters start getting moved around, and you realize that you're just dead, whether it be the Vault way with the Disciples, whether it be the Inkmoth Nexus way, whether it be the Ballista way. There's just so many ways to die, and it just changes the game immediately the minute it comes down.
Yeah, so it's in terms of what it did to Magic.
Exile
it means
bridges.
Magic.
Do you know how many bridge from belows I've lost to this? So just,
there it went.
Living End. If you play Living End, they love to sacrifice everything in response, and then it just all comes back, and it's like, damn it.
Arcbound Ravager is the flag bearer for the Affinity archetype, where greater than 55% of fields were playing Affinity, and if you weren't playing Affinity, you were playing decks with like main deck Molder Slugs. You were playing main deck Oxidize. Like you were basically the hate deck. Like this is, you only play like main deck sideboard cards. It warped the format in a way that heretofore has been unseen before or since in terms of popularity. You look at the Pro Tour where Jund was a quarter of the format, and people are like, well, that's way too much of a deck. You look at the format where everyone was playing Cawblade, and that was 20%, or Blue-White Delver, where that was 20% or 25% of the format. The days where Birthing Pod was in its heyday. All these time, or even now, Goblin Chain Whirler,
40%.
Red-Black, aggro control mid-range, or Survival of the Fittest, aggro control mid-range. None of them came close to the amount of percentage of players that were playing Affinity. Nothing has come close. I think that this is an excellent choice for number one.
And that was our top 10 banned and restricted cards. You'll see them on screen right now for your review. Take a look at my list, Aaron's list, Ruben's top 10. And we want to hear from you what card we did not talk about, and we'll select our favorite to win a $50 gift certificate to CoolStuffInc.com. But before we go, I want to thank my co-hosts. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ruben.
Before we go, Aaron, do you prefer banned and restricted cards or blocked and muted lists?
I don't think we could discuss even a tenth of my blocked and muted list on the show. So let's go with banned and restricted.
All right, fair.
All right. We want to hear to our final slide. I want to thank our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com, our co-sponsor, CardHoarder.com, my co-hosts, Aaron Campbell and Ruben Brusser. You guys for watching and listening. I hope you support us at Patreon.com/MagicMikes. Follow, like, tweet, favorite, share, subscribe, do everything social that tells people we exist. Catch us online at Twitch.tv at Magic Mikes, on Twitter at Magic Mikes Cast, our Magic Mikes subreddit, and like the Magic Mikes page on Facebook. Talk to us privately at MagicMikesPodcast@gmail.com. Follow the audio-only podcast at MagicMikesPodcast.libsyn.com, or find us on iTunes, or join us here next week, same time, same place, for another episode of Magic Mikes. Good night, everybody.